This week, British politics plunged into turmoil after Prime Minister Keir Starmer unleashed his most confrontational attack yet on Reform UK and Nigel Farage, an assault that has detonated inside Westminster and left Labour reeling from a wave of disastrous polling numbers.
And we are a diverse country where people have come here for centuries to this country to make up who we are. It is one thing to say we're going to remove illegal migrants, people who have no right to be here. I'm up for that.
It all began at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, where Starmer used his keynote speech to brand Reform UK's immigration policies as racist and immoral. He denounced their proposal to deport lawfully settled migrants, insisting that Britain's identity was built on tolerance, inclusion, and centuries of immigration. Removing illegal entrants, he argued, was legitimate, but targeting those who had built their lives in the country would, in his words, tear Britain apart. The speech was meant to project moral leadership and strength. Instead, it marked the start of a full-scale political confrontation. Starmer framed the next election as something larger than the usual Labour versus Conservative contest, a historic clash between progressive values and populist nationalism. For the first time, he positioned Reform UK not as a fringe movement, but as a direct threat to the country's unity. He then escalated further, singling out Nigel Farage by name and accusing him of profiting from division. The attack was calculated to rally Labour's base, but its tone struck many observers as patronising and vindictive. Political commentators immediately questioned why the Prime Minister had chosen to elevate Farage to centre stage, giving him the very attention that fuels his movement.
You can all see these snake oil merchants on the right, on the left, but be in no doubt conference. None of them have any interest in national renewal.
Within minutes of the conference ending, the backlash had begun. Reform UK's rapid response team framed Starmer's remarks as proof that Labour no longer represented ordinary Britons. They argued that the government was smearing anyone who supported tighter border controls, effectively calling millions of voters racist. Television pundits repeated the claim across news channels, amplifying the perception that Labour had insulted its own working-class base. Farage capitalised on the moment. His response was swift and relentless, portraying Starmer's rhetoric as dangerous and irresponsible. Analysts noted that the episode reinforced a broader narrative already damaging Labour, that it had become the party of moral superiority and metropolitan elitism, out of touch with the anxieties of everyday citizens. By the end of the day, the story had shifted from immigration policy to political competence. What was intended as a show of strength had exposed deep weaknesses. A Prime Minister who looked angry, reactive, and disconnected from the voters he once promised to unite. Inside Labour headquarters, officials privately admitted the rollout had gone badly off script. Outside, Reform UK's poll numbers began to surge, signalling that Starmer's attempt to crush his populist rival might instead have breathed new life into him. The political fallout was immediate, and for Keir Starmer, potentially terminal. The backlash to Keir Starmer's Liverpool speech was immediate and ferocious. Within minutes, Nigel Farage issued a blistering response, unlike anything political reporters had seen before. An opposition leader rebutting a Prime Minister's keynote address in real time.
I sort of felt that he just chucked in the left thing just so that people wouldn't be able to write that he was going on and on
100%.
about.
100%.
You know, I think that's.
Farage accused Starmer of dragging political debate into the gutter, warning that the Prime Minister's language could encourage hostility and even violence against Reform UK supporters. His tone mixed anger with disbelief. For years, Farage had described Starmer as a measured and decent man. Now he said he was shocked by his behaviour and convinced he was unfit to lead the country. The message was clear: this was not principled leadership, but desperation from a government in freefall. His counterattack cut deeper than simple outrage. Farage portrayed Starmer's rhetoric as the latest chapter in Labour's long discomfort with English patriotism, tracing it back to Gordon Brown's infamous bigoted woman remark and Emily Thornberry's mock tweet about a van bearing the St George's Cross. To Farage, nothing had changed. Labour still recoiled from national identity and treated ordinary voters as moral inferiors. Commentators noted the shift in tone. This was no longer a policy disagreement about migration. It had become an existential fight over who defines Britishness itself. Farage's framing was devastatingly effective. By arguing that calling for border control was now treated as racism, he implied that the government had branded half the nation bigoted. That accusation resonated with voters already suspicious of Labour's moralising tone.
These policies are racist and immoral, and by implication, Reform supporters, Reform voters, Reform sympathisers are racist too. Yes, if you think we should control our borders, you are, by the definition of the Prime Minister and his cabinet, all racists.
Political analysts warned that such rhetoric from both sides risked inflaming extremism. Britain has already seen 2 MPs murdered in the last decade. Many feared that reducing opponents to villains could push fringe actors toward violence. Farage cited the downgrading of his own security protection by 75% as proof that ministers were ignoring real threats while fueling dangerous emotions. Inside Westminster, senior figures were alarmed at how quickly the situation spiraled. Labour MPs whispered about the Prime Minister's judgment, while party strategists described the episode as a self-inflicted crisis. The latest internal poll showed that just 53% of Labour members still wanted Starmer to remain leader, a warning sign that loyalty inside the party was collapsing. Outside Parliament, the damage was visible in the numbers. A new national survey suggested that if an election were held today, Labour would capture fewer than 100 seats, a staggering fall from the landslide it won barely 14 months earlier. Public satisfaction had crashed to record lows. Only 1% of voters said the government had exceeded expectations since taking office. Veteran pollster Stan Greenberg, a longtime advisor to Democratic campaigns in the United States, called Labour's trajectory a textbook strategic failure. He argued that the party's natural support base of roughly 45% had collapsed into the 20s because of weak campaign choices and an inability to address voters' core worries. Immigration, living costs, and national identity. Greenberg's analysis went further. He said British politics had entered a new psychological phase in which attitudes toward Donald Trump now divided voters more sharply than Brexit once did. The populist versus establishment dynamic had crossed the Atlantic, and Labour, he warned, was losing the cultural argument as quickly as it was losing the economic one.
Do a U-turn?
Yes.
Oh. I hadn't even finished the question.
Yes,
Well, it was a very long question, Laura, to be fair. No wonder I hadn't finished it.
Yes. No, they need revenue, they need investment, they need a whole new formula, they need growth, they need a closer relationship with...
Even routine interviews began to underline the government's unease. When senior ministers stumbled through questions about tax, energy policy, and border control, the tone was hesitant and uncertain, reinforcing the perception of a leadership that had lost both confidence and direction. For Labour, the combination of collapsing polls, internal dissent, and a resurgent populist opposition marks a critical turning point. What began as a moral stand against Reform UK has become a referendum on Starmer's credibility, and increasingly on his age, stamina, and ability to command a restless party. The man who once promised steady hands and quiet competence now faces the question no Prime Minister wants to hear. Has time already passed him by? As Labour's collapse accelerates, the crisis is reaching deep inside the party itself. Veteran Democratic pollster Stan Greenberg, a long-time advisor to Labour's sister movements abroad, revealed that he has privately warned British leaders for years about the dangers they now face. Greenberg has worked with every Labour leader since Tony Blair, and in recent months, he says, he has continued feeding advice directly to senior figures, including Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, once considered one of his closest allies. Greenberg's message was blunt. Labour had become too insular, too complacent, and too detached from the working-class base that built it. Yet his advice, it seems, went largely unheeded. The timing of this meltdown could not be worse for Keir Starmer. Reform UK is now surging to historic highs, with some projections suggesting they could win a general election outright. If current trends continue, Farage has already vowed to teach Labour a lesson in the May local elections, a reckoning, he says, that will be remembered for generations. As the country heads toward the May local elections, the stakes have never been higher. Labour's collapse, Reform UK's meteoric rise, and the intensifying hostility of political rhetoric are pushing Britain into uncharted territory. What happens in the next few months will decide more than who governs. It will determine what kind of nation Britain becomes in the years ahead.